How does this sound to you?
How was I supposed to know what love looked like when Daddy never showed me what felt right? How was I supposed to set the bar when I...
Well, this is Xania Monet, the first known AI artist to earn enough airplay to debut on a Billboard radio chart. She's now been signed into a multi-million-dollar record deal, and it's fueling the heated debate on whether virtual artists will replace human creators. We'll be discussing whether AI is a threat or a tool and how its use is affecting artists in Taiwan and the region. Chen-yu Lin is a lecturer in creative and cultural industries at the School of Journalism, Media and Culture at Cardiff University in the UK. And she's also a popular music researcher and documentary filmmaker. Welcome to the program, Chen-yu. Great to have you on. Firstly, let me get your thoughts on how you feel about generative AI tools and how they're transforming music creation.
Thank you, Divya. So we are already seeing certain trends that I think Gen AI is bringing to the music ecosystem. Firstly, I think we've seen that many of the music and the hit songs in the charts these days have been produced by Gen AI, and I think there is trend that is said that it's harder to be told by any listeners that to be able to tell one song that is created by human artists or the other from Gen AI. And we're also seeing that I think like platform and services such as Sunos is attracting more and more investment. And the users, I think recently, just the number of the users just surpassed 2 million. So we've definitely seen that it has been growing.
You're a pop music researcher. Let me get your thoughts. Where do you stand in the debate? Is AI replacing human creativity or enhancing human creativity from where you're sitting?
I think AI technologies have the potential to add an extra layers of expressions which derive from human creativity. But it is not supposed to be there to replace human activity and artistic expressions. And the main difference, I think it is because that AI generated music, for example, that is still trained through a big database, while I think human collaboration and expression always involve intention, always involve different kind of social relations. So which make it, I still think it's different.
Yeah, and speaking of musicians, in Taiwan and China, people are using AI to copy singers like Jay Chou or Stephanie Sun in Mandopop style covers. Now, what do you think that's doing to the fan base of Mandopop?
So I think this is happening around the world, and I can see that it was maybe from 2 or 3 years ago. We've already seen, for example, the singer Stephanie Sun, and her voice was through generated AI would quite precisely and sophisticatedly portray this special tone of her voice, and I think the same technology on a global scale also we're trying to, for instance, like bring the artist or the singer that were dead already alive. So I do think there are a lot of issues in terms of ethics, in terms of consent, but at the same time, I understand. I think sometimes this is fans' way of engaging with their artists in a creative way, and being able to have the artist singing songs that they probably have never sung. And it also brings back, for example, memories, and then it has this function of commemorating those artists sometimes. So I understand the creativity of it, but at the same time, I do think that there are lots of issues that worth exploring in terms of, as I mentioned, like consent and ethics.
You know, Chen-yu, we hear a lot about the debate, particularly from the Western perspective, and we hear a lot of opinions from, artists in the West. But what is the debate that's happening in this part of the world? Is it being spoken about, and how are artists here approaching AI?
Yeah. I think one of the debate, which I understand that some of the artists and people have already thought about, is cultural representation. So, for instance, that I think there was this recent research article suggests that only around 6% of the music that has been used as the training data for large language models are of non-Western genres. So, which means that I think um, the Western genres of music and especially popular music has been dominated in terms of what can be generated through those very useful and powerful generative AI music tools. And so I think that it is, again, I think a dilemma, which is a lot of this data, I think, regardless of in the West or in Taiwan or in China, that they were used in the first place without consent. But then again, I think once that the tools have become so powerful and everybody's using it, it's also a time for us to ask questions about, like, for example, the sound of indigenous music in Taiwan, or Hakka music, or even Thai language music, Taiwanese language music, that the specific sound and historical context which we can hear in this music, can they be represented? And I think currently, I think the technology is still in lack of that. And then that's one of the things I think in our part of the world that the artists may think about. And on the other hand, I think there's also this questions with like how they should engage with it. So legally speaking, I think in every nation that there are different juridical systems, and then I think there are different kind of rulings and regulations in terms of copyright and intellectual property. So I think it is very much still a battle that is ongoing.
Right. Chen-yu, and another part of this battle, your research has explored how censorship affects Taiwanese musicians, especially from the mainland Chinese market. Now, can AI, or what different kind of spin is AI giving this right now? Can Taiwanese musicians avoid certain types of censorship by using tools?
I think my current thoughts and position on this is like, is AI could potentially make it even more difficult to break certain barriers. And I think the reason why I think this way is that AI technology is actually not just with music, I think, but with social media and other forms of communication, that it creates different layers of censorship. So in terms of the Sinophone Chinese language music ecosystems, we have model level censorship to begin with, which is operated through filter prompts. So why I think anyone is trying to create, for example, music or art with AI technology, it already has a layer of censorship with those prompts being filtered out or the outputs. And this is very likely to happen. Why even before, I think, something which I think might be considered the output or art today was created. So that was before that. And we also have platform level moderation. So which means that it involves automated deletion or removal. And last but not least, I think algorithm, it also would have certain control on visibility. So for instance, like a removal or even like downranking certain contents. So why contents may be able to be uploaded, but it's rarely seen because there is certain political sensitive content, for example, and then just the system would naturally let it be more hidden or unseen. So all those issues are kind of related to, I think, platform censorship, which can be seen and have already been discussed with some streaming platforms, including like YouTube and Spotify. But so I think that we already have been seeing this kind of censorship emerging, but with generative AI, it could be even more complicated. But even with that, I think like the creators have always been very creative, and then being able to find new ways to breaking the systems, including using different kind of homophones, for example, I think, which is something very common in the Sinophone world. which is using the play of language, the sound of the language to imply certain things that may not be very easily picked up by the automatic systems. But I think compared to the time that when there is no such automatic system to detect all this potential controversial terms, that it is still a pretty difficult time to be in. And we've also seen research shows that how, for instance, that the Chinese government has already been also using Gen AI system to detect the more sensitive terms and then trying to govern the internet. So I think we're seeing this battle, which is actually AI against the AI.
Right.
And so I think for now that we're still just observing and seeing that where it's heading to.
So in general, having all this AI generated content is actually making it more difficult to bypass the censorship and making it easier to impose the parameters and the limitations that the government wants or the platform wants. Is that right?
Yes, I think there is a level of that, and also I think, Divya, you're completely right to mention about the platforms, because in many of the nations or places, such as Taiwan, which has a vibrant liberal democracy, but still a lot of the powers are now falling on the hand of the corporation tech company. So they have a lot of saying in terms of, I think, what can be governed and what can be heard from those platforms, even though it might not be the traditional form of state censorship, which is usually top-down. But through that process of moderation, I think sometimes it is questionable if diverse voice could actually be heard.
So what needs to be done, particularly in this part of the world, as you mentioned, because a lot of the data that's being used currently is mostly from the West. But if we want to preempt that, what needs to be done in this part of the world to make sure that the IP rights remain with artists?
I think this is actually a global issue, because why saying that I think currently that the music of, for instance, Taiwan is not being represented in those data. But I think that one of the way of resolving these issues that were proposed by some of the thinkers and then also technological experts are to decentralize AI tools. So for instance, that I think making the musicians to be able to have the right to decide what they're doing with their data, and they could opt in, they could opt out, and then also they could license their own music for training purpose. And then also they could know that first, like how they could be reimbursed and how they could make use of those data, which is something I think that's currently still a battle to be fought for on a global stage. So why I think that we said that Taiwan's music, especially I think traditional music, is not being represented. I think it also potentially gives us a leeway to think about how we're going to approach this issue, which is a global scale. So so I do think that every time a technology appears that the in terms of music or media and communication technology, I think societies would always have to realize that regulation is actually necessary to protect creative labor and cultural worker. So, which actually it's the same phenomenon from the invention of a phonogram, and all the way to perhaps streaming devices or streaming services. So I think the same principle also applies to AI, and which I think that it's worth to explore if decentralized AI technology, rather than all of the data, say, owned and operated and made use of by some very limited numbers of technological company, might be some ways that we could explore different kind of solutions.
How concerned are you about the diversity of music that will come out, particularly if more and more generative AI is being used even by artists with their own music?
I am slightly concerned, but at the same time, I think that this might sound a little pessimistic, but I think that just like streaming platforms to begin with, that I think why Spotify was just founded, that most of the music online would that are accessible through the platforms would be the majority would be, I think, the Western genres. But later on, I think they just kind of like expand. So I think that's why that there is this term some of the scholars will refer to as digital or data colonialism, which is, I think, eventually that it will include data from different parts of the world. It's the natural tendency if a transnational corporation, a very powerful, centralized company, they tend to have the tendency to do so. But still, I think that's pretty much just copying what we have now, because I think even till today, the representation, the distribution network of recorded music is still very uneven. So I think the AI would, rather than re-innovating the system, it might have the chance to copy the system. But I do think that we are able to see hope on the horizon, which is if we are able to create a more diverse system based on decentralized use of this technology. And it is possible, I think, something that's new and different that may arise. And so I think in terms of that, it might not be in the coming 2 years or 3. It might take a little bit longer, like 5 or 10. But I think there is still reason to be optimistic about how this technology is being used. But I think it's a fight that is broader than just for the musicians. It's also a bigger question that will address to anyone that use AI and how we want to have this relationship with this technology as as human race, and if there are certain type of regulations that would be there so that we can use it responsibly.
All right, so as we want to wrap up on a hopeful note, let me bring it down to you and your personal experience. How would you say generative AI will help filmmakers and researchers like you in their work to create?
So, for instance, that for one of the latest film, which is actually a film about music censorship and broadcasted and produced by Taiwan Plus, actually. It's called Silent Sunrise. And then there was actually 1 minute of animation that was quite clearly, I think anyone would be able to pick up, that was generated by AI, and that was AI generated animation. And the reason why I think the director decided to do it was, first of all, I think it's an honest answer, which is down to our budget. And then secondly, I think there is a layer of creative expression embedded in it as well, which is because that was a very sensitive topic, and a lot of the interviewees that they weren't, they were anonymous. So with the use of generated AI in animations, I think we're able to tell their stories without being able to, we're able to tell their story without giving too much information about who they are, which also offer layers of, I think, confidentiality and anonymity. And what traditional animation can still do that. And I think that this is something that is, I think, quite an efficient way of doing it. But if I'm being completely honest, that I think if there is like a lot of more time and then resources, that I think it might still be a more interesting way to collaborate with a real person rather than using generative AI. And I think from my observation, that's also the dilemma that a lot of the filmmakers are in, because we want our work to be polished and good and then enjoyable. But at the same time, I think we're in this world that a lot of people make use of these technologies. So so I would say conflicted. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about, I think, the use of Gen AI in filmmaking.
Thank you, Chen-yu Lin, for joining us from Cardiff. And now we bring you a special feature from Connected Shubhampal on an experimental project by Taiwan's National Symphony Orchestra involving artificial intelligence, Dvorak Symphony, and amateur painters from Taiwan's elderly community.
AI 的产生让世界整个都改变了。
人工智慧就是说来，它也是人设计出来的，
比人脑还进步。
我觉得 AI 现阶段要成为我们的敌人，还有一点距离。 会先有一个乐曲的欣赏，然后这个乐曲的欣赏之后，我们会开始做一个画作的一个创作，所以你就会想说这个音乐会被看见，因为你必须把你听到的音乐、想象的画面要把它画下来，然后呢，你画的东西是一个画作，这个画作会融合到接下来我们透过一些科技的运用之后，它会出现在画面上，搭配乐曲。
其实国家交响乐团是1986年诞生的，那个时候其实是整个社会对于一个专业交响乐团有一些期许。近年来，我们也导入了高科技的结合，那其实让国家交响乐团的音乐不是在音乐厅发生而已，而是在每一个乡镇、每一个家户之间都能够聆听国家交响乐团的音乐，然后来陪伴每一个心灵。
大家都知道，其实台湾在今年应该就会迈向超高龄的社会，也就是说，在每5个人里面就会有1位是65岁以上的高龄者。
AI 对于长辈来讲，科技是很遥远的事情。可是其实 AI 不只是让大家很有压力的要去学习新的东西，而是它可以协助我们，让我们的生活更便利。
甚至是 AI， 它其实是可以让很多本来没有这些技术的人，他可以透过这个 AI 的工具，他可以去做很多他以前没有想过可以做的事情。
知道这个 idea 的时候，我蛮惊讶的，因为我本来这个彩排的时候看到影片，以为只是已经设计好做好的，所以我本来一直觉得这跟 AI 有什么关系呢？然后原来有这么多的这么强的这个现场的互动这样子。
我有跟舒涵在音乐会开始之前有稍微聊过天，他就有告诉我说，AI 在这场音乐会里面会用之前他们工作坊里面长者听这首交响曲创作出来的画作，然后去搭配我们的音乐做呈现。
那么多的作品，那么多的本来没有那么美好的画图形象，就因为 AI 的加入，让它产生了感情，跟产生了力量，整个都活泼起来，看了真是叫人叹为观止啊！
其实是第一次看到自己的画作在荧幕上，觉得真的非常的开心跟感动。
音乐来讲都是一个想象，但画画也是一样。因为画画在你生活中，你可以体会，形之以一种画面，
或是我们谈的这个科技的介入，可以让这个长辈再找到新的热忱。那我觉得它就是一个很好的一个自我的一个新目标的实现。
我觉得这还不错，这是它的有利的部分。那它的缺点，我也是会有担忧，就是说。可能他一下子就可以做一大堆的东西，然后他的品质什么就可能会变成一般人都不太了解什么是好，什么是不好。
所以我觉得那个最独特的东西是人类最宝贵的资产，但是我们怎么样的去使用现在所谓的 AI， 能够带进我们的生活当中，带进我们的音乐当中。然后我觉得音乐会如果有这个 AI 的参与，也会让观众有很多很不一样的想法。
对我来说，好像 AI 就是一个可以思考非常快，然后做很多资料汇整的人工大脑。对，就是它可以帮我们处理很多人脑在这么短的时间内没有办法处理的事情，然后帮助我们可以达到更大的效率。这样
，AI 是一种让电脑模仿人脑的技术。那当它代替我们思考的时候，如果我没有继续的思考，我就很容易变笨。
将来可能会有很大的发展，也不一定。也许就真的到发展到最后，可能会有机器人交响乐团。
对我们来讲也会觉得，有时候蛮跳脱我们的思考的界限。所以我觉得其实 AI 如果真的很好的运用在生活当中或音乐当中，我觉得它是一个很棒的朋友。
因为我们呈现的是现场整个跟同事、跟其他音乐家之间互动，然后还有甚至现场的观众一起互动。
其实，在我们的生活的体验里面，我们还是视觉优先于很多听觉的感受。透过这个视觉的一些相关的成果的呈现，我觉得对于音乐团体来讲，我觉得是一个新的启发跟学习。然后我们也可以让艺术跟所谓的科技或者是 AI 能够有更人性的搭配，然后能够在我们的生活里面可以达成更多有用有效益的公共效益。